Hi and welcome! Today we take a look at MAR, WEZ and other funny acronyms. MAR stands for Minimum Abort Range and is defined as the range at which the aircraft can execute a maximum performance out or abort maneuver and kinematically defeat any missile and remain outside an adversary's WEZ. Which leads to the next acronym, WEZ. The weapon engagement zone is defined as the three-dimensional volume of airspace around the fighter into which the hostile aircraft must fly to employ weapons. WEZ as a concept is somewhat similar to LAR, but from the opposite perspective. LAR stands for Launch Acceptability Region and is defined as the three-dimensional volume of space around the hostile aircraft into which the fighter must fly in order to have a chance to successfully employ its weapons. These three concepts have something in common. They refer in fact to volume of airspace, missile capabilities, whilst achieving a specific purpose, namely hitting a hostile, successfully defend from an hostile shot. So, WEZ and LAR sound quite similar but opposite. What about the MAR? The minimum abort range is a recurring topic of geometry and timelines. In fact, I am now in the process of updating all timeline articles, some of which date to 2019. However, my reference WEZ model is 4 years old, and a lot has changed since the year of the COVID. The topic of this video is discussing the data I gathered and how I use them to put together a partial WEZ LAR model and approximate a meaningful MAR, which will be later used for timelines. The modus operandi is different from usual. Let's see our beloved AIM-54 Mark 47. This is not the missile envelope, rather the speed of the missile at impact when launched at a given range. This is why you see the performance crumbling as we get closer to circa 20 nautical miles. In fact, as we know well, this is where the rocket motor is exhausted, but the missile is not being lofted yet. Let's now compare it to the R-27ER and the AIM-120B. As you can see, the A-8M blows away the Phoenix up to a certain range in terms of speed. This is actually the fastest missile in DCS out of the 17 I tested. Each dot on the chart represents a missile launched at Mach 1 against the target almost static in the air. Okay, now we know the performance of the missiles as a function of the range. The next step is identifying the distance at which the missiles stop hitting the target. In other words, the distance at which you can run away safely. I thoroughly tested a few missiles, for example R-27ER, AIM-54C and 120B Super 530D. My purpose was finding the range at which a maximum performance turn can achieve the objective. At 35,000 feet and 25,000 feet, this range coincides to the moment a missile hits Mach 2. At 15,000 feet and 5,000 feet, the range coincides to a missile speed of Mach 1.5. In this scenario and using these parameters, missiles tend to arrive between 0.2 and 0.5 miles from the Tomcat, initiating the turn and running away. As you can see, the reference value observed makes sense and constitute an acceptable baseline. The thing is, for what we do in DCS, MAR is not meant to be precise down to the meter, or at least it should not be, because there are always variables involved. For example, the hostile can be slightly higher or faster, and our primary goal is the safety of the crew and the aircraft. For this reason, the observed value, let's call it the empirical MAR, should be then increased by a certain quantity, a safety buffer if you will. After discussing the matter with people way more experienced than me, thanks WEZ, we found that the buffer of 5 nautical miles should work. Considering that my turns were not as tight as a proper pilot would make them, even a value of 3 or 4 nautical miles should be fine. It's up to you. Out of curiosity, I approximated how much the separation is decreasing whilst we turn. In other words, how closer we get before beaming and then turning cold. This is because, we're not turning on the spot. To do that, I use the radius of the semicircle drawn as a turn cold. The radius is calculated as the distance traveled divided by p and is de facto the projection of the turn on the pre-turn vector. The idea is that if you can do a better job than me tightening the turn, you can reduce the buffer, but if you're sloppy on the turn, not only you need more room, but the time spent reducing the separation is higher, inducing potential unnecessary risks to your aircraft. As a side note, remember that you can pull an incredibly tight turn, but you may end up very slow at the end of it, which can be much worse than a slightly wider but faster turn. It all comes down to the properties of your aircraft and your ability as a pilot. If you're here, rejoice. If you die, virtually, you can always blame the stick monkey sitting in the front seat. Before wrapping this video up, I'm sure you're wondering why I did not consider the most effective defensive maneuver in DCS, the split test. Simply put, in DCS, a split test defeats almost anything, even at fairly short range, but it can easily compromise the integrity of a section and decreases awareness, and losing awareness is something you should really avoid if possible. And that's all for this video. You have surely noticed that I have not given a number in terms of WEZ or MAR. The reason is simple. I intend to release the tool you have seen on the screen previously, so you can compare different missiles, set your own buffer, calculate your own MAR values, and so on. I put it together in 20 minutes, so it's nothing fancy, but I should get the job done. Thanks for watching and take care.